Hey everyone, welcome back to Succession Stories. This is Laurie Barkman, and I am joined today by someone I think you're really going to enjoy. He's not only a super nice guy, but he's the author of an exciting book, which I think you will all relate to. So we'll talk about the book in a moment. And I'm super excited to share that he encouraged me to continue my education for exit planning. And he doesn't even know this news, but I am certified now as a CEPA, which is a certified exit planning advisor. And it's thanks to this guest for pushing me over the edge and getting that done. And I'm so appreciative of that. Welcome to the stage, Daniel Feiman. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Laurie, and congratulations. I know you were a wee bit nervous about that, but I had plenty of confidence in you. You've been doing what you're doing for long enough to know more than most in the area of exit planning and transition. So I had more confidence in you perhaps than you did, but you knew you'd do fine.
I knew I would do fine. This content has been so valuable to my clients and such an interesting topic when we talk about business owners and how they can add value to their business and how eventually they're going to let go, which leads us to today's conversation. And right out of the gates, Daniel, I'm going to ask you the big question. Do you think succession planning is a taboo topic?
Unfortunately, Laurie, I think it is for many people. And the reason I say that is when I talk to business owners, regardless of their age or how long they've had their practice, they seem to want to talk about today and tomorrow, not next week or next month. They're much too focused on the immediate, too tactical, I think, rather than strategic. Because as you and I have talked about in the past, and I think we're aligned, to do a true successful transition, to do an exit that is ideal, you want to have 3 to 5 years invested in building up your organization to optimize. And until and unless owners take this seriously and look at succession as a strategic choice and build towards it, they're shortchanging themselves.
There is that challenge of being so busy and putting out fires, and we've got to make sure that the books are balanced and all the things that are pulling us to stay in the now, right? And stay in the weeds and stay in the business and not working on the business. Um, it makes it tough. There's a lot of owner dependencies in some companies. I see that a lot. You mentioned a 3 to 5 year transition for or 3 to 5 year timeline for transition planning and exit planning, which I completely agree with. And I see a lot of companies who are so owner dependent. It's hard to think about succession. So one of the things I thought we could talk about today is why this shouldn't be a kick the can kind of thing, why this shouldn't be a taboo topic, and how it will help business owners today run a better company. And in the context of running a better company, I thought we should talk about succession the way I like to talk about it, just so we can get our head around it. It's ownership succession or leadership succession or both. When you work with clients and in the basis of your book, which if you're on our YouTube channel, I'm showing you the book here on the Business Transition Sherpa YouTube channel. Check us out. The book on succession planning systems, which is a pretty big hint that this is not a one-time thing. This is a system. So back to the question, which is this about ownership succession, leadership succession, or both?
It should be in a perfect world both. And here's why I take that approach. I've worked with organizations my entire career, and I've seen some good and bad, and I think we all have. The best possible outcome for any owner, in my experience, whether you decide to exit soon or transition to a different role in your organization, and I've seen a number of owners do this, or merge or acquire or grow, any of those 5 options, if you are the focal point of the business, if the business is you, then you are limiting your options. You're limiting your ability. I believe that we all have the same 24 hours a day to dedicate to whatever. And even if you're working 24 hours a day, which of course we can't, you have a bandwidth. You and I share something else, and that's the John Warlow's book, Built to Sell. And if you remember, I actually reviewed that when it first came out for the New York Journal, and it resonated so much with me because of my experience with clients. And I've tried to incorporate his concepts in my own practice. And that is, you have to make yourself completely dispensable to add value. So it is succession planning, transition planning for an individual, for the CEO, the founder, is important, but it's tactical. To do it for the entire leadership team is much more strategic because it allows you to expand your options, to expand your bench. I mean, look what the Dodgers were able to do, and I apologize to Yankees fans, but what were the Dodgers able to do because they had a strong enough bench? They used in one game like 8 pitchers. If they didn't have a strong enough bench, they wouldn't be where they are. Same exact thing with organizations. If we choose to identify, assess, and develop our future leaders, it means every organization and every leader has more options to their benefit.
I can relate to that. Just a personal story to share. I was hired in a third generation company from the outside, so I was not family. And in the interview process, they said, we're interviewing you for not the next 2 years, we're interviewing you for the next 20. I almost fell off my chair because I had also in my career worked for startups, and you kind of know when you're interviewing with a startup, it's sort of a 2 year interview, right? And that's expected, but it was very unexpected to hear from that perspective in the interview process. And I honestly, I loved it. I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. And it ended up working out, and I got the role as a CEO of a subsidiary of this business. And that's eventually the predecessor to me becoming business transition advisor and M&A advisor. So I really set the course and learning, even in the interview process, right? What were they looking for? They told me they were looking for that long-term succession. Do you work with companies who have that long-term view, and then they're clear about how to go find the right people for the right seats when they have that clarity around a long-term succession vision?
We certainly do try. We have the challenge, as many organizations do, of being introduced to founders, owners, CEOs of organizations who aren't as long term vision as others, and we have to educate them. The most successful founders, owners that I have worked with over the years are the ones that are willing to look long term, willing to think and act strategically. And part of the point that I make in the book is we may or may not have to go outside to find and build tomorrow's leaders. So we build into the book a series of tools to use to identify internally who has potential. You get to assess them, and there's even a couple of self-assessments for those potential leaders. So in some organizations, and I was working with one just earlier this week, they need to go outside. They don't have enough people who have the willingness and the ability to be trained as leaders. And I think everyone who wants to can improve their leadership skills. Most of us are not born leaders, but we can become leaders through education and through intention. But I was working with an organization just a few months ago. They had enough of the right people in the organization. They just hadn't taken the time to identify them. Once they did, their succession and transition plan became much easier because they could focus on the staff they had that had potential for the next 20 years.
Yeah, it's complicated. There's a company I'm affiliated with. They're a privately held third gen company, and excuse me, second gen company. And they're really starting to think about that third gen. But the third gen is, college age. They're not quite in the business yet. And it's going to be some time before one or more of them is in the business, if at all. And it's a real question now of the skip generation and what to do. And it's hard to know if family is going to be a succession solution. And it's good to have options, especially if you have to do recruiting. So I'm going to come back to this question about ownership succession and leadership succession, because I think we have a good amount of diagnostics on how to interview with the roles and responsibilities and characteristics and attributes of a candidate. But what I see less of, and what I'm so curious about, if you've encountered any of this, is how do companies think about hiring in from the outside and saying, wait a minute, we might be that type of organization that family isn't, the insiders of family aren't an option for us for whatever reason, but management might be. So how do we hire in people who might want to be owners one day? Have you come across any of those things?
I most definitely have. And again, it seems to vary somewhat by industry. I currently am working with a couple of law firms where the owners are in their 50s and are starting to think of this succession idea and don't have anyone in house. So we help them create a tool. In fact, we share it in the book. It is how you look at your ideal candidate across four different attributes. So, knowledge, experience, education, and personal attributes. And you list the ideal candidate. And then you match, this is our ideal. Let's look at the candidates we're interviewing, and then you can do a gap analysis. Here's the ideal, here's where they're strong, here's the areas that we need to develop them in. And it's a relatively objective way to be able to measure your best candidates based on your determining in advance your ideal.
What are some of the questions that should be asked of a candidate that might be on a succession of ownership path?
Do you want to be an owner? I don't mean to be flip about this at all, but with one particular organization that I'm working with now, they asked that of someone because they had put this into their effectively their job description. They put it out in a closed situation. And so everyone in theory they were interviewing was coming in to take a senior role with the idea of buying into the company and eventually buying the owners out. This was part of the plan. And one individual said, that's not really my goal, which shocked us because we had said that in advance. So it is important if you're going to be hiring from the outside, specifically to have someone buy in to the company and or buy the owner out, to make sure that number one, they have that desire. But number two, they have an ownership mentality. We talk about thinking like an owner, and we've all seen some employees who do think like owners, although most don't, unfortunately. And then the third piece of that is to have in mind how that's going to be financed. Because even if someone comes in with a desire, someone has an owner's mentality, someone really exhibits all of the attributes we want, are they going to be able to financially buy out the owner, or is the owner going to have to finance this transaction? Because sometimes, and you know this better than I do, Laurie, sometimes you can get bank financing, and I'll use the term bank in a general sense, but sometimes you can't. So is the owner ready, willing, and able to finance this transaction if the new owner, the soon to be senior leader, doesn't have the financial wherewithal to do so?
It's a really important question. How is something going to be financed? In families, there could be an assumption that it's going to be gifted. And of course, there's a tax implication for whatever path we take. There's tax mitigation strategies, of course. So that should be part of the conversation with your financial and tax advisor, if that's something that you're thinking about. And then when it comes to employees, yes, there's different mechanisms. And one of the clients that I was working with had an intention. He'd love to sell the company to people that worked in the business. This is a manufacturing facility, this manufacturing business, machine shop type of company. And when it came down to it, and you ask that question about, do you want to be an owner? Unfortunately, the answer, the signals that I was picking up on was no. And there's ways to dissect that. If someone says yes, then I think we need to test it, right? So one test as an example, and I'd love to hear, your examples too. So one test as an example would be, okay, if I was going to bonus you $10,000, and I'd say you can have that in cash, or you can turn back around and buy equity in the business. What would you choose? I had a different client, not the manufacturing client, but a different client. And he had two people that he was considering taking on, and, offering them an equity position. And one person was literally ready to go mortgage his house and use the funds to buy in. And then the other one was like, no, thanks. I'll just take my paycheck. So that's one test, right? Do they financially understand what that means? And then, the saying, heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people just don't want the responsibility.
Very definitely. I've seen situations, and I was working with a particular engineering company. They were a technical engineering design company. The two owners, two founders, had identified five internal staff, unrelated, not family, that they wanted to sell the business to over a 5 year period. We put a plan together. When I interviewed each of them, it turned out that three of the five were afraid of the responsibility of, oh my gosh, if I can't make payroll on Friday, what do I do? So, yeah, your point is very, very well taken. And it goes back, in my mind, to the concept of thinking like an owner. That's not just I'm the boss and I can come up with a strategic plan, but where does the responsibility lie? How do I think over what period of time this transition should occur? Am I comfortable with an earnout versus a buy in versus a finance transaction? What happens if something goes sideways? How am I going to handle that stress? There's a lot of questions that we can ask a potential successor to see if they're ready today and or will be ready at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are the questions that business owners have trouble answering about succession? What gives them the biggest anxiety? They just don't even want to talk about it or can't think about it. Oh, these are so tough. I have no idea.
What's your business worth? Do you want to die under your desk? What's your strategic plan? And what does success look like? It's amazing to me how many owners don't ask these questions of themselves and think about them for their own benefit. I don't personally think these questions are rocket science, but again, too many people are working in the business, even though they think they're working on the business, and haven't addressed these as some of the most fundamental questions there could be.
Do they run for the hills when you ask them those questions? Do they give a nervous laugh and then walk out of the room? What happens?
Typically, I'll get one of a couple of responses. One is avoidance of eye contact, which means you know what that means. I don't want to deal with this. Versus that somewhat befuddled look of, oh, I'm supposed to be thinking about that? What I prefer as a third option as a response is, wow, I hadn't thought about that. How important is that? Well, that opens up an opportunity to have a legitimate, deep conversation about the fact that we all have an expiration date. We may not want to think about it, but literally, I have asked some owners, do you plan to die under your desk? I rarely get a yes, but on occasion I do. Okay, so even if you're going to die under your desk, do you want to take the company down with you, or do you want to plan for your legacy? Do you want to transition out of the business being focused on you and create all those other options? So there's your transition opportunity. And if you're not going to die under your desk, then would you like to explore the options that are best for you? I always like to put it in that type of context so you, the owner, get to have control. And again, that's why I tried to get these points across in the book. When you think about things in advance, go back to our 3 to 5 year time frame as a minimum. Where do I want to take the business? What legacy do I want to leave? Do I want to sell, merge, grow, acquire? What do I want to do with it? So as soon as we can get an owner away from the tactical day-to-day treadmill and begin to think strategically, think long term, and ask and answer some of those questions, that's when we have some aha moments.
Definitely. I see it too. I see it a lot. And it's probably the number one reason I think people don't work on these concepts we're talking about is they feel too tethered to the business. And maybe it's because they want to be tethered or because they just are tethered and have no idea how to have a business that can thrive without them. And it is absolutely a risk, probably for your health long term, and also long term for the business value. It also kind of makes us wonder, right? Are we building assets or are we building a lifestyle job? And if we're building a lifestyle job, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you think you're going to have an asset to transfer and wealth to grow in your overall portfolio and in the legacy with your family and stakeholders, you might be shocked to learn that you're not creating the value that you think you're creating. And so I think that this just sort of goes back and underscores my very, very first question, which is why is succession a taboo? Because if we can truly see succession as a value add, it enables us to unlock. Like, for example, I had a guest come on this show and he said, I'm planning to retire in 3 years. And it's Bill Spohn for anyone that wants to find the episode. And he announced it to his company. He announced it to other stakeholders, customers, etc. And I said, "How did it feel?" He said, "It felt great. It felt like a weight's off my shoulders because it's out there now, and now we can plan effectively. And now I can have open conversations with my partners at work and people on my team. There's people I think feel like, oh, I'm going to be a short timer. I'm going to be cut out. Well, you know what? You own the company. So no, you won't. You're not going to be cut out. And that's on you. I think if you are cut out, that means you're probably withdrawing and maybe that's something you want and that's healthy too. That's okay. I'm a big advocate, as you are, Daniel, to have a plan and have a written plan. Because if it's just in our head and swirling around, it's not really a plan. And let's face it, we all keep swirling on it. So it's nothing that's documented and going to get done because we can't get help. When you're working with business owners and you're saying, "Hey, I can help you," what are some of those other aspects? Is it time? Is it money? Or is it really about attitude and saying, "Yeah, I think this is important enough that I'm going to make the effort and I'm going to allocate the budget"?
Well, when it comes to succession planning specifically, we we ask enough questions, or we try to ask enough questions, so that the owner recognizes we're there to help them do what's best for them. Part of the transition questionnaire we have is, if your business, if you sold your business today, if you were out of your business for whatever reasons, how would you spend your time? Because one of the stumbling blocks that we run into on occasion is recognizing that an owner, their life is their business, and they don't know what they're going to do if they're not in the business anymore. And so helping them have a conversation with family and friends about what they love to do, what they'd like to do, new things they'd like to explore, to plan the next phase of their life. And I'll give you a very quick example. A colleague of mine who I'm very impressed with spent 18 months researching and designing his retirement because he didn't want to be like a couple of people that you and I know that sell their business and are very unhappy because they have no purpose, they have nothing to spend their time on, etc. So it's critically important to help a business owner recognize there's life after sale. And if you plan it appropriately, if you have the right support, the right help, then you can optimize your business, you can future proof it, you can design your next chapter of life and be equally satisfied doing something else, whether that's being a serial entrepreneur, and you and I both know some, or it's writing a book, taking that world cruise with your family, et cetera, et cetera. There's many, many options if one takes the time to explore them.
Absolutely. Daniel, we've talked about a lot of things today. Looking for a summary recap. What are the top three action items that you recommend business owners start doing today?
Great question. If I were empowered to educate the world's business owners, I would suggest number one, be a true visionary. Start to think and act strategically. Look long term for your personal benefit as well as the organization itself. What do you want and need to do to take your business to whatever perfect horizon you want? Then, to support that, do an assessment of your existing staff. And again, we've got a tool for that. What are the critical positions in the organization? Who's in them now? Who can step into them subsequently, internally? And if there's a gap, who do we need to find externally? Design your perfect interview tool. In other words, go back to those four elements: education, etc. So you hire and screen and train and develop the best possible candidates. So you've got the strongest bench that is executing a plan to get you where you want to go. And you just touched on something very important a moment ago. Every organization needs to have a plan that is written, that is communicated throughout the organization with clear metrics, that is updated on a regular basis. That means, in my experience, that's only about 1% of companies. Everyone can do that for their own benefit. If they choose to invest a few dollars and a few hours in themselves, the ROI is a multiple of that.
Absolutely. May I add one more to your list?
Please.
I would like any owner who is contemplating a succession to their management team to think all the way back to recruiting and look at the questions that you're asking and look at the criteria you're looking for if you think you're recruiting future owners. I don't think enough companies are doing that today, especially technical firms that have internal transfers happening at a rapid pace. So that's my list too. So thank you for sharing yours. And I think this has added a lot of value to our listeners today. If people want to learn more, Daniel, what's a good way for them to get in touch?
Easiest way is go to the website, which is literally builditbackwards.com, or they can email me, Daniel Feiman at builditbackwards.com.
Perfect. And we'll have those in the show notes that anyone can find on our website, thebusinesstransitionSherpa.com, and of course, in your favorite podcast player. So, Daniel, I want to thank you so much for coming on Succession Stories. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to more.
As do I, Laurie.
Well, thank you. And to our listeners, thank you so much for being a fan of Succession Stories. We're so glad that you were here with us today. If you learned something or you took some notes and you want to talk about it with colleagues or friends, please rate and review the show. We'd love to hear from you and what you enjoyed about it. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and YouTube, as I mentioned earlier, the Business Transition Sherpa channel. So that's it for Succession Stories. Tune in next time for more insights from transition to transaction.